Have you ever looked at someone in power and wondered, how did they get there? We've all seen it. People who seem almost laughably unqualified, rising through the ranks, while those with real competence, real depth, remain unseen, unheard, overlooked. History is full of these characters. Emperor Nero, playing his lyre as Rome crumbled into fire. Or in our time, Elizabeth Holmes, building a billion-dollar empire on nothing but smoke and mirrors. It's so common, it starts to feel like a pattern, almost as if the system rewards the illusion over the substance. But what if that's not an accident? What if there's a dark logic at work, a hidden mechanism where power and incompetence aren't opposites, but partners? Today we turn to one of the most misunderstood minds in political history, Niccolò Machiavelli, a man exiled from the halls of Florentine politics, who then dared to write the unthinkable truths in The Prince. Machiavelli didn't fantasize about how rulers ought to behave. He told the truth about how they do behave. Not in a perfect world, but in this one. Everyone sees what you appear to be, he wrote. Few experience what you really are. That line alone reveals the first key to our paradox, because in the pursuit of power, perception often outweighs reality. And this is where it gets disturbing. True intelligence, deep, reflective intelligence, is often a liability in the world of power. Why? Because it comes with traits that don't survive well in ruthless environments. Self-awareness, moral reflection, the ability to see complexity where others offer black and white answers. Now imagine that person in a room full of ambitious climbers. They hesitate where others charge. They question where others promise. They think when others perform. And in a system that rewards boldness over wisdom, they get left behind. It's the reason Socrates, perhaps the wisest man in Athens, was silenced by death, while countless populist figures throughout history soared to power on the wings of empty certainties. The tragedy? Power often belongs not to those who understand the world best, but to those who understand how to appear certain. And Machiavelli saw it all. So the next time you wonder how someone incompetent ended up in charge, remember, they may not have succeeded in spite of their ignorance, but because of it. And until we learn to see through the illusion, we remain pawns in a game that rewards the mask, not the mind. Socrates once said, "I know that I know nothing." That humility made him a giant in philosophy. But in politics, it made him a failure. Meanwhile, the world has always rewarded another kind of voice. Not the questioning mind, but the confident one. The one that claims, "I alone have the answers." A controversial 2017 study published in the Journal of Management suggested something unsettling. Intelligence correlates with leadership effectiveness, but only up to a point, specifically an IQ of around 120. Beyond that, more intelligence doesn't help. It actually starts to hurt. Why? Because highly intelligent individuals often struggle to connect with others. Their thoughts become too layered, too complex, alienating instead of inspiring. They speak in nuance, while the world prefers certainty. Let that sink in. Being too smart might actually keep you from rising to power. And whether or not you fully accept that study, it forces us to ask, what kind of intelligence does power really reward? Because if intellect can be a liability, what does the system actually favor? Here's where the picture turns darker. It's not the most thoughtful voice that leads. It's often the loudest, the most unshakably confident. You've seen it in classrooms, in boardrooms, in governments. The person who asserts the most, regardless of truth, is the one who commands the room. There's a name for this phenomenon, the Dunning-Kruger effect. First identified in the 1990s by psychologists David Dunning and Justin Krueger, it describes a bias where those with the least competence grossly overestimate their abilities, while those with true knowledge often doubt themselves, aware of just how much they don't know. "The fool doth think he is wise," Shakespeare wrote, "but the wise man knows himself to be a fool." Centuries before science caught up, he named what Machiavelli would have instantly recognized. In the brutal arena of power, confidence often trumps competence. Modern research backs it up. A 2020 study in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that people perceived as overconfident were more likely to be seen as leaders, regardless of whether they had the skill to justify it. The illusion of certainty was more influential than actual ability. History offers endless examples. General George Armstrong Custer, whose unshakable confidence led to disaster, but also to glory, rank, and reverence. Or in the tech world, where charismatic founders pitch grand visions with unwavering conviction. Think of Adam Neumann, turning WeWork into a multi-billion-dollar illusion, not because of what he knew, but because of how confidently he spoke. So what does this all tell us? It tells us that in the game of power, truth is optional. Certainty, even false certainty, is currency. And unless we learn to see beyond the show, we risk following those who speak the loudest, instead of those who think the deepest. Despite a business model built on shaky ground, his unshakable confidence drew in billions. Investors followed him not because of what he built, but because of how certain he sounded. A cult of personality wrapped in the language of vision. And this isn't an isolated phenomenon. It's global. In Japan, Masayoshi Son of SoftBank lost over $70 billion on failed ventures, yet continued to command trust and capital. Why? Because confidence speaks louder than caution. In post-Soviet Russia, the rise of oligarchs had little to do with competence, and everything to do with connections and boldness. It wasn't skill that won the game. It was audacity. But not every nation fell for the illusion. Singapore, for example, designed its system specifically to filter out charisma without competence. It built guardrails, where most systems built stages. In 2012, researchers from Stanford and the University of Houston uncovered a disturbing truth. In unstructured groups, narcissism, not competence, was the strongest predictor of who would rise as a leader. The groups didn't perform better under narcissists, they just believed they did. Why does this happen? Because our brains take shortcuts. Confidence mimics competence. Decisiveness imitates clarity. And in a world where true expertise often means grappling with uncertainty, these illusions become dangerous. This is how incompetence rises. But worse, this is how it spreads. There's something far more insidious at play. A mechanism that ensures once incompetence gets in, it stays in. Centuries ago, Machiavelli saw it clearly. The first method for estimating the intelligence of a ruler, he wrote, is to look at the men he has around him. Weak leaders don't surround themselves with brilliance. They surround themselves with obedience, because competence is threatening. Dr. Thomas Chamorro Premuzic, an organizational psychologist, calls this competence threat. When leaders feel insecure, they don't hire the best. They hire the safest. Not those who challenge them, but those who protect them. And thus begins the slow institutional decay, a drought of competence that spreads outward, from the center of power to the farthest branches of influence. Look at Emperor Commodus. He replaced Rome's most capable minds with flatterers and sycophants. Entertainment over expertise. Decline followed. Or Brazil's Centrão system, where political appointees rise through patronage, not performance. The result? A bureaucracy rich in loyalty, poor in ability. In Zimbabwe under Mugabe, party loyalty replaced talent. Capable administrators were ousted. The cost? An economy that unraveled. This is known in organizational science as homophily, the tendency of people to surround themselves with others like them. And when the top is incompetent, this means islands of mediocrity form, sheltered from challenge, starved of dissent. This is how systems collapse, not in a sudden explosion, but in a quiet suffocation, where silence replaces feedback and illusion replaces truth. Ask yourself this: have you ever worked somewhere that punished curiosity, where raising questions was seen not as engagement, but insubordination? Where pointing out problems meant you weren't a team player? That's not dysfunction by accident. That's the system protecting itself. These are the ripple effects of the network we've described, where confidence masquerades as competence and where truth becomes a threat to authority. And even when we know this, we still fall for it. Why? Why do we so often choose leaders who offer easy answers to impossible problems? Why do we hand power to those who simplify when we live in a world built on complexity? The answer lies not in politics, but in psychology, in our deeply human need for certainty in a world that offers so little of it. Real expertise almost always speaks with hesitation. It admits what it doesn't know. It weighs trade-offs. It tells us that answers are messy, that progress is slow, and that every solution carries a cost. But our minds are rarely satisfied with that. The great majority of mankind are satisfied with appearances as though they were realities, Machiavelli wrote, and are often more influenced by the things that seem than by those that are. And this is the core of it. We crave the appearance of certainty, even when we know it might be a lie, especially in times of fear, confusion, or change. In moments of crisis, we don't flock to the leader who says, "This is complicated. There are no quick fixes. We'll have to think carefully." We follow the one who says, "I alone can fix this. The problem is simple. The solution, obvious. Just trust me. It's comforting. It's clear. It's wrong." Look at the contrast in how real experts speak. Climate scientists, for example, talk in ranges, probabilities, and policy nuance. They offer honest uncertainty because nature is uncertain. But public discourse doesn't reward that. Instead, it rewards the loudest voices on either side. Those who frame climate change as either total doom or a complete hoax. No ambiguity, no gray areas, just certainty. Healthcare debates follow the same pattern. Experts discuss trade-offs, costs, long-term outcomes. Politicians promise universal coverage with no downsides. Guess who gets the applause? Again and again, the simple story wins. Not because it's true, but because it soothes our anxiety. And it gets worse. In a striking 2017 study from Yale, researchers discovered something disturbing. When people were given politically charged data, their ability to solve even basic math problems plummeted if the correct answer contradicted their beliefs. Even more alarming, the most intelligent participants were the most biased. They didn't use their intelligence to find the truth. They used it to defend what they already wanted to believe. This is what cognitive psychologists call the need for closure, a deep discomfort with ambiguity, a hunger for finality, a preference for a wrong answer that feels right, over a right answer that feels uncertain. And in that need, in that rush to settle the question before it's fully understood, we make ourselves vulnerable to manipulation, to illusion, to leadership that feels strong, but is hollow inside. Studies have shown a striking pattern. When people feel uncertain, afraid, or threatened, their need for cognitive closure spikes. They begin to crave certainty like oxygen, and in that craving, they become far more receptive to black and white thinking, and to authoritarian figures who speak in absolutes. This is the paradox. The more complex and unstable the world becomes, the more vulnerable we are to those who promise simplicity. It's like a psychological immune system collapse. Just when we most need subtlety, wisdom, and restraint, we reach instead for the illusion of control. Ask yourself honestly, have you ever felt drawn to an answer precisely because it was simple? Because it felt solid, clear, and final? Even when something in you quietly knew reality was more complicated? That's not weakness. That's the mind's natural response to fear. But it's also the very crack through which manipulation enters. And while our addiction to simplicity explains much, there's a darker force at play, one that reveals why intelligence, by itself, often fails to resist manipulative power. Here's where Machiavelli becomes especially disturbing. He warned that morality could become a weakness in the struggle for power. In perhaps his most infamous passage, he wrote, "It is necessary for a prince who wishes to maintain his position to learn how not to be good, and to use this knowledge or not use it as necessity requires." Let that sink in. The more intelligent someone is, the more likely they are to develop complex moral reasoning. But in ruthless environments, that same moral depth can become a liability. Because while they weigh the ethical consequences, others act without hesitation. While they pause to consider integrity, others lie, manipulate, and promise what they never intend to deliver. Power often doesn't reward virtue. It rewards strategy. History gives us a clear example. Cicero, brilliant, eloquent, principled, versus Julius Caesar, who crossed the Rubicon not just geographically, but morally. Where Cicero hesitated, Caesar acted. Where Cicero honored norms, Caesar shattered them. The same pattern repeats in modern times. Political candidates with integrity struggle against rivals willing to smear, deceive, and inflame. And in corporate life, it's no different. A study from the University of British Columbia found something alarming. Psychopathic traits, like lack of empathy, when combined with charm, were positively correlated with rapid promotion. The ruthless rose faster, not because they were better leaders, but because they were unburdened by the moral brakes that slow, more conscientious minds. This isn't isolated. In China, the Shenu, the archetype of the cutthroat businesswoman, embodies this principle. In Nordic companies, despite strong cultures of cooperation, those who manipulate still outpace those who lead with principle. This isn't just a personal flaw. It's a structural advantage, an ethical asymmetry built into systems of power. Those who care the least often rise the fastest, and the rest of us are left asking, what kind of people are we rewarding? And what kind of world are we building when they reach the top? This is what game theorists call a race to the bottom. When unethical tactics succeed, everyone else is pressured to follow. Not because they want to, but because not doing so means falling behind. And slowly the exception becomes the norm. Corruption becomes strategy. Incompetence becomes invisible. And entire systems are reshaped in the image of those who game them. It's a bleak picture, but it's not hopeless. Because not all environments reward deception and mediocrity. Some resist. Some still reward substance over show. And by understanding what makes the difference, we can begin to build systems that protect against the rise of the unworthy. Machiavelli understood this long ago. Different environments reward different traits. Some elevate the capable, others invite the cunning and incompetent. So what determines which kind of system we end up with? 4 structural forces stand out. First, feedback and accountability. In fields where failure is obvious and immediate, incompetence has nowhere to hide. Think of a surgeon. If they fail, the outcome is clear, undeniable, and often tragic. Or an architect whose bridge collapses. These professions demand real skill, because reality gives no mercy. But in other domains, feedback is delayed, distorted, or deniable. A politician can blame their predecessor. A CEO can hide behind accounting tricks. A media figure can build a career on charisma while spreading falsehoods. In these spaces, incompetence can live forever. Second, institutional design. When power is centralized, when with no checks, no balances, failure becomes systemic. The collapse of the Soviet Union wasn't just political, it was architectural. A system designed to silence dissent created a vacuum of competence. Contrast this with Germany's dual-board corporate model. Management is separated from oversight. That structural tension creates accountability, and accountability protects against decay. Third, information asymmetry and complexity. When success is measurable, when outcomes are visible, merit tends to rise. But when goals are vague, when only surface impressions matter, style triumphs over substance. As Machiavelli put it, men judge more by the eye than by the hand, because everyone sees you, but few touch you. In complex domains, few can truly assess competence. So we fall back on confidence, appearance, and performance. We trust the mask because the truth is too hard to measure. Fourth, incentives. What we reward, we repeat. When systems prize short-term wins over long-term integrity, we invite shallow leadership. The 2008 financial crisis made this painfully clear. Leaders were praised for quarterly profits even as they led institutions toward ruin. The incentives were wrong, and the system rewarded recklessness. So what can we do? We must design with care. Build structures that reward truth, not spin. Demand feedback loops that expose failure. Distribute power so no one escapes scrutiny. And create cultures where depth is valued more than spectacle. Because when the wrong people rise, it's rarely an accident. It's a design flaw, and design can be changed. Ask yourself, In your own life, which environments reward depth, honesty, and real competence? And which ones elevate noise, appearance, and manipulation? The structures around us shape more than outcomes. They shape who rises and who is left behind. By understanding the architecture of power, you begin to see where truth is nurtured and where it is quietly buried. But here's the unsettling truth. Even in well-designed systems, incompetence can still ascend. Not by accident, but through psychological tactics that cloud perception and silence opposition. Tactics Machiavelli would have recognized instantly. First, the exploitation of tribalism. The incompetent leader thrives by drawing bold lines. Us versus them. They turn legitimate criticism into an attack on the tribe. And once their identity fuses with the identity of their followers, any threat to the leader becomes a threat to who they are. Psychologists call this identity fusion, a state where the leader and the group become psychologically inseparable. Challenge him, and you challenge me. History is full of examples. Jim Jones, who led his followers to ruin. Najib Razak, who used ethnic division in Malaysia to retain power through scandal. Bolsonaro, who polarized Brazil to the point where truth became tribal. Second, the weaponization of chaos. Incompetent leaders create storms, a constant churn of controversy, conflict, and noise. This overloads our cognitive bandwidth, and when we're mentally exhausted, we become easier to manipulate. Outrage replaces reflection, reaction replaces resistance. Third, Orwell's concept of doublethink, the ability to hold contradictory beliefs at once. These leaders change positions without consequence, rewrite history in real time, and distort language until truth feels like a moving target. Facts no longer matter. Only loyalty does. Machiavelli once wrote, "The vulgar crowd is always taken by appearances." He wasn't insulting the masses. He was warning us. Our minds evolved for simplicity, and in the age of complexity, that becomes a dangerous weakness. Fourth, the exploitation of economic fear. When people feel insecure about their jobs, their future, their dignity, they become susceptible to those who offer simple answers, scapegoats, slogans, stories that feel good even when they aren't true. In the shadow of economic anxiety, the incompetent leader shines, not because he is wise, but because he is certain, and certainty is seductive when the ground beneath your feet is shaking. So consider your own media habits. How often are you lured into the latest outrage? How often do you mistake noise for meaning? These are not just personal distractions. They are tools of power, and until we learn to see them, we remain vulnerable to them. Recognizing these patterns is not enough. We must cultivate strategies to protect our own minds, to strengthen the structures around us, and to resist the rise of those who would confuse charisma with competence and illusion with leadership. Because if we don't choose what leads us, someone else will. At the individual level, awareness is the first defense, a quiet but powerful resistance against forces that manipulate without detection. When we understand the hidden levers that shape thought, we're no longer blindly pulled by them. This resistance rests on three essential practices. First, we must cultivate intellectual humility, the rare and vital ability to admit what we don't know. Studies show that those who embrace humility evaluate ideas not by how confidently they're delivered, but by how soundly they're built. Intellectual humility becomes a kind of cognitive immune system, shielding us from the infection of false certainty and protecting us against those who speak loudest but think least. Second, we must refine our media literacy, learning to distinguish signal from noise, depth from distraction. In an age where information floods every channel, clarity becomes a choice. It means being selective, skeptical, willing to question not just what is said, but how and why it's presented. Warren Buffett put it simply, really successful people say no to almost everything. Apply that to the mind. Say no to outrage masquerading as insight. Say no to speed over substance. Because wise thinkers do not consume the world indiscriminately. They choose what enters their minds as carefully as what enters their bloodstream. Third, we must embrace philosophical reflection, the practice of stepping outside the daily storm to examine what truly matters. The Stoics did this each evening, asking, "What did I do well? What did I fail to master?" Francis Bacon said, "The wise man will make more opportunities than he finds." Reflection is how we become creators of our mental environment, not just passive absorbers of it. But no individual practice can substitute for flawed systems. At the collective level, institutional design is everything, because power, when left unchecked, tends toward decay. Here, too, three foundational principles arise. First, we need robust accountability, structures that expose failure, even when wrapped in charm or confidence. Compare an organization with independent oversight to one ruled by loyalists and echo chambers. The Boeing 737 MAX tragedy showed what happens when profit silences the voices of those who know better. Accountability wasn't missing by accident, it was removed. Second, institutions must champion cognitive diversity, not just for appearance, but because heterogeneous minds see angles homogeneous groups miss. They disrupt groupthink, challenge assumptions, and bring sharper focus to the truth. In matters of complexity, agreement can be dangerous. Disagreement, when thoughtful, is a tool of clarity. Third, we must enforce transparency, systems that strip away the comforting fog of jargon and secrecy. Complexity, when left unexamined, becomes a shield for incompetence. Sunshine laws, open records, conflict of interest disclosures. These are not bureaucratic burdens. They are the safeguards of trust, and binding it all together is education, not merely training, not just technical skill, but the cultivation of discernment, the teaching of ethical reasoning, and the development of minds that can hold uncertainty without collapsing into dogma. Athens gave us the academy, not just to build knowledge, but to build character so that the future would not be ruled by the loudest voice, but by the clearest mind. Florence birthed the humanists, because great civilizations don't merely instruct, they cultivate wisdom. So ask yourself, in your own community, which of these safeguards exist? And more importantly, which are missing? What would your world look like if its foundations were built not on charisma or conformity, but on competence, humility, and truth? As we near the end of this exploration, we return to the man who quietly shaped its core, Niccolo Machiavelli. For centuries, he has been misunderstood. He didn't promote the dark patterns of power. He revealed them. Machiavelli wasn't cynical. He was clear-eyed. He believed that by studying how power actually functions, not how we wish it would, we might build systems that protect rather than corrupt. It is not titles that honor men, but men that honor titles. In this single line, Machiavelli reminds us, power carries no virtue on its own. It is the character of the one who holds it that gives it meaning. Authority is not sacred. It must be earned, by how it's used, not by where it's placed. When Machiavellian realism meets modern psychology, an uncomfortable truth emerges. Human systems are vulnerable to manipulation because the human mind is. But it is precisely these uncomfortable truths that we must confront if we hope to build something stronger. The path forward isn't paved by denial. It's forged in understanding. It's in building institutions that account for human weakness, not prey upon it. It's in practicing the kind of reflection and resilience that makes us harder to fool. And above all, it's in realizing that while ignorance may seize power, it is intelligence, wedded to courage, that holds the power to create what endures. So ask yourself, what patterns have you seen in your own life, in your workplace, your politics? Have you noticed these dynamics unfolding, in subtle ways or in plain sight? Share your insights in the comments below. If this exploration sparks something in you, consider subscribing and sharing it with someone who still believes thoughtful minds can change the world. Until next time, remember, understanding the darkness is not surrender. It's how we learn to build the light.